Hi, I'm Neil, 36, and the day my parents sued me, I realized I was nothing more to them than a nurse with a guilt complex and a spare bedroom. It didn't start in a courtroom. It started in the kitchen. A bowl of soup, a spilled spoon, and the cold echo of my father's voice calling me a failure, for the third time that week. You need some context. I'm the youngest. Only child technically if you go by who's still around. My older brother died when I was 13, freak accident, never recovered from that, any of us. But especially my dad. He used to say I was lucky to be spared his expectations. Funny, how lucky looks like being screamed at for bringing the wrong brand of soup cans. My dad, let's call him Martin, was always a bully in a nice shirt. Corporate guy, made people feel stupid for sport, then called it leadership. Mom? Enabler deluxe. She'd dab his chin and say, he doesn't mean it. Even while I sat there nursing a busted lip at 14. Fast forward 2 decades. Stroke hits him like a freight train. Partial paralysis, speech slurred. The man who once fired an intern for mispronouncing synergy now needed help to pee. I'm the only one who stepped up. Moved him into my apartment. I had to leave my job. I was a field tech, always on call, and pick up gig work with flex hours just to manage his care. He couldn't afford a nurse full-time. Insurance barely covered equipment, let alone human decency. So I gave up my salary, my space, and most of my sanity. And for what? Gratitude? No. Not even silence. Instead, he weaponized every breath. I was too slow, too soft, too stupid to keep a wife. I'd been divorced 2 years, not his business. Every single day was a test he thought I was failing. And still, I stayed. Until one night I snapped. Not at him, I didn't yell. I just sat down. Opened my laptop. Hired a caregiver 3 days a week to start. Used my own savings. I told them over dinner. That was my mistake. You're abandoning your father in his time of need, Mom said, spoon halfway to her lips. We didn't raise you to be selfish. You didn't raise me, I said. You trained me. That's when Dad, in his hoarse croak, spat the words. You're a failure. A coward. Just like I always knew. 3 days later, I got served at the door. They were suing me for abandonment. Not a metaphor. Actual court papers. Wait for it. The reason? Negligent withdrawal of familial duty resulting in emotional and logistical harm. I laughed so hard I thought I might throw up. But the laughter stopped the second I read the affidavits. My mother had written that I was emotionally unstable. My father's statement said I was delusional and unfit to supervise care, because I had a history of depressive episodes. I had one. After my divorce. Which he never let me forget. They wanted to declare me legally liable for ongoing care, and compel me to either resume full-time duties or pay for 24/7 care out of pocket. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. I wasn't their son anymore. I was a failed service provider who dared to set a boundary. And worst of all, they weren't even embarrassed about it. The day of the first hearing, I almost didn't show up. Not because I was scared. Not even because I thought they might win. But because some part of me, the part still stuck in a 12-year-old's body, flinching at the sound of my dad's shoes in the hallway, still wanted to believe this was a bluff. A tantrum. Something that would disappear if I ignored it long enough. But court doesn't care about emotional baggage. So I showed up. Pressed shirt. Shaved. Folder in hand. I'd even shaved the back of my neck, something I hadn't done since my last job interview. Why? Who knows? Maybe some part of me still wanted to look like the good son. The professional one. The one who used to fix phones at 3 in the morning and never sent an invoice. The courtroom was beige and hollow. My parents sat at the table across from me, flanked by a lawyer whose tie cost more than my monthly rent. My mother gave me a polite nod like I was a distant cousin she barely recognized. My father didn't even look at me. I sat down. My lawyer, a younger guy named Darius who I hired through a mutual friend, leaned over and whispered. They're arguing this under a care agreement clause. But there is no formal contract, right? No contract, I whispered back. Just guilt and blood. He nodded. That's usually not admissible. The judge was a woman in her 60s with a voice like gravel and no tolerance for melodrama. She opened with a deep sigh and a reminder that this was not a criminal trial, nor a moral arbitration. It was a civil case about responsibility of care and reasonable expectations of support. That word, reasonable, would become the drumbeat of the day. My parents' lawyer opened with the performance of a lifetime. He painted me as a dependent adult child who had assumed full-time care responsibilities out of a sense of familial obligation, and then abandoned those responsibilities with reckless disregard, leaving the plaintiffs emotionally and physically endangered. He even used the phrase dereliction of duty, like I was a soldier who walked off post during a siege. When it was my turn, Darius stood calm, clear. There is no contract, he said. No financial agreement. No legal document. My client was caring for his father out of compassion, not obligation. He gave up his job, his income, his mental health. And when he finally decided to get professional support to protect both of them, his parents responded by treating him like a paid servant. He paused. This is not a case about abandonment. It is a case about boundaries. About an adult who was guilted into assuming a role that no person, son or not, should be forced to perform indefinitely. And the plaintiff's attempt to punish him legally for making a sustainable decision is not only cruel. It's unprecedented. The judge nodded slightly, jotting notes. But then came the cross-examinations. They brought up everything. My therapist's note from 2019, the one I used to get medical leave after my divorce. A screenshot of a text I sent my mom last Christmas that read, "I feel like I'm failing him." A voicemail I left during a breakdown, sobbing that I couldn't do this anymore. My father's lawyer leaned on that one especially hard. Would you describe that as stable behavior? He asked. I sat straight. Looked him in the eye. I'd describe it as a man burning out alone without support. I didn't need stability. I needed backup. He blinked. Didn't respond. Wrote something down. When my mother took the stand, I braced myself. She looked so fragile. So careful. She wore a pale blue cardigan and kept folding her hands like a teacher waiting for recess to end. Neil used to be such a kind boy, she said to the judge. He gave us everything. But lately it's like he turned on us. Like we were a burden. We're his parents. All we wanted was to stay together as a family. We didn't mean to hurt him. That part almost got me. Almost. But then she said, he told me once he didn't want to be like his father. That he was scared of becoming cold and resentful. And now, look at what he's doing. And that's when something inside me broke. When it was my turn to speak, I stood without notes. Your Honor, I said. My parents are right. I did try to give them everything. I moved them into my home. I bathed my father. Changed his clothes. Cleaned him when he couldn't make it to the bathroom. I worked nights doing deliveries to cover what Medicare wouldn't. And yes, I said I didn't want to turn out like him. I looked at my father. Still blank. Still stone. But the truth is, I already had. I was bitter. Short-tempered. I yelled at people who didn't deserve it. I ignored texts from friends. I started hating the sound of my own name because it meant someone needed something again. I stopped being a son and became a sponge for other people's need. I didn't abandon my father. I abandoned myself. And when I finally made one decision, one tiny, humane decision, to protect my own well-being, my parents sued me. Silence. I looked back at the judge. I'm not here asking for approval. I just want to stop being punished for saying, I can't. Because I can't. And I shouldn't have to. There was a long pause. No one moved. And then, from the back row, someone coughed. I turned. There, in the last bench, was my old friend Lauren. I didn't know she was coming. She gave me the smallest nod. That almost did it. I swallowed the lump and sat down. The judge called a recess before giving her verdict. I walked into the hallway, hands shaking. Not from fear, but from the weight of years lifting off my back like damp clothes. 10 minutes later, we were called back in. The judge didn't make a speech. She simply said, Motion to compel care is denied. This court will not enforce responsibility through coercion. Case dismissed with prejudice. That's it. No dramatic gavel. No apology. Just legal boundaries where none had existed before. And my parents? They left without a word. No glance. No drama. Just a slow scrape of shoes on linoleum as they walked past me like strangers on an elevator. They lost. But it didn't feel like winning. Not right away. After the verdict, I stood there in the hallway while the bailiff locked the courtroom doors behind us. People filtered out around me like I was invisible. My lawyer clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You held your ground. That's rare." Then he left too. Lauren waited until everyone was gone before coming over. "I'm proud of you," she said. I hadn't heard those words in so long, I almost didn't register them. She pulled me into a hug that felt like oxygen. And then she whispered something no one else had said. "Are you okay?" I nodded too fast. She saw through it. We went out for greasy diner food afterward, grilled cheese and watery coffee. I talked. She mostly listened. It was the first time I said some of the things out loud I'd only ever rehearsed silently in the mirror. Like how I used to sleep with my phone volume on high in case Dad needed me in the middle of the night, even though half the time it was just him calling to scream about the blanket not being folded the right way. How I'd gone entire weekends without leaving the apartment because I was afraid if I left him alone for 3 hours he'd have an episode, and then throw it in my face for months. How I once caught myself checking his breathing during a nap and instead of feeling concern I felt hope. That was the worst one. Lauren didn't judge. She just nodded slowly, as if to say, "Yeah, that's how deep it goes, isn't it?" I got home late. The apartment was quiet, my new quiet. The part-time caregiver I hired had already been dismissed weeks earlier. Once the lawsuit landed, I pulled back all contact. Now it was just me. The silence. And a cardboard box still sitting in the hallway with some of my dad's things. I didn't open it. I didn't throw it out either. Just stepped around it, like you do with grief that doesn't fit in any drawer. The next morning, I woke to 14 missed calls and 37 text messages. Guess who? Family. Uncles I hadn't spoken to since the Obama administration. My mom's sister, the one who once told me to take the high road, after Dad called me a freeloading man-baby during a Christmas party. My cousin David even left me a voice message. "Hey, heard about the court thing. Look, man, I don't know the full story, but maybe you could have handled it privately? Dad's not doing great. You humiliated them." Humiliated them. I stared at my phone and laughed. Because I had a sudden, vivid memory, being 10 years old, standing in the middle of our living room after Dad had backhanded me across the face for knocking over a coffee mug. Mom rushed over with a dish towel and a glassy smile, whispering, "Stop crying, Neil. He's just under pressure." I wasn't allowed to be hurt back then. Now I wasn't even allowed to protect myself without it being a public scandal. They called it betrayal. But what they really meant was exposure. Because the second I set a boundary, their whole image, the kind they curated in potlucks and Christmas cards, cracked open. People saw what was inside. And the thing about narcissists? They'd rather be hated than seen. The next big blow-up came that weekend. Saturday morning. I was at the grocery store. My phone buzzed. A local news alert. Small blurb. Retired executive Martin Welch filed a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services against his son, alleging neglect and mistreatment following a recent legal dispute. I nearly dropped a carton of eggs. What the hell? I pulled over my cart. Searched. Martin Welch complaint. And there it was, a short statement. Mr. Welch, 72, alleges that his son's recent behavior has created an unsafe and emotionally abusive environment for a medically vulnerable elder. He filed a complaint to a government agency. Even after a court ruled I had no obligation, he was trying to trigger a protective investigation, which, by the way, meant I could be visited, monitored, investigated without warning. All because I said no to wiping his mouth and being called a disgrace 3 times a day. I called Darius, my lawyer. "Can he do this?" I asked. "He can file it," he said. "Anyone can file. But unless he has evidence, medical records statements, they won't pursue. Still, it creates a paper trail. They might reach out to you. Don't freak out. But also, don't ignore it. I didn't freak out. I made coffee. And then I sat in the kitchen staring at the slow drip of the pot like it was a lifeline. What they don't tell you about standing up for yourself is how quiet it gets after. It's not freedom at first. It's just absence. No calls. No tasks. No instructions. Just space. And in that space, guilt tries to rebuild itself like mold in the corners. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I could have hired more help earlier. Maybe it was wrong to let him sit in that apartment alone while I took a weekend for myself. That's what trauma does. It doesn't just hurt, it negotiates with you afterward. It tells you to come back. Lower the volume. Be the good one again. But I didn't call him. Not even after I got a voicemail from my mom later that week. You've ruined us, Neil. He won't eat. He won't talk. He says you're dead to him. You always were so sensitive, but I didn't think you were cruel. I hope you're happy. Click. No signature. No love. No light. Just a woman so deep in her husband's gravity she couldn't hear herself anymore. I wasn't happy. But I was finally honest. And that was new. I started doing things like walking every morning before work. Just 20 minutes. AirPods in. No playlist. Just the sound of my own shoes on pavement. I joined a Reddit support group. I posted a thread called, "My parents sued me for not caring for my abusive father, and now they're trying to destroy my reputation. How do you survive the backlash of doing the right thing?" The responses came flooding in. Same here. I set boundaries and my mom told people I was mentally unstable. I left after my dad hit me with a belt at 26. My aunt said I was selfish for not giving him a second chance. You're not the villain. You're the leak that exposed the rot in the pipes. That one stuck with me. The leak that exposed the rot. That night, I went back to the box in the hallway. Dad's things. A cane, a couple of sweaters, a battered journal. I didn't open it. But I didn't avoid it either. I sat beside it, cross-legged on the floor, and for the first time, I whispered something out loud to the empty room. You don't own me anymore. It didn't feel like an epiphany. But I slept through the night. Which, for me, was a miracle. 3 weeks after the court case, I got a letter in the mail. Not certified. Just plain white envelope. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of legal stationery. Notice of preliminary review. Adult Protective Services has received a formal complaint regarding the care and well-being of Martin Welch, age 72. An investigator may contact you as part of routine protocol. No signature. No details. Just that cold, procedural language that makes you feel like you've already done something wrong. I stood in my kitchen rereading the letter until the words bled together. It was happening. He was really doing it. After failing in court, after dragging me through a public lawsuit, my father had turned to the state. Hoping, I guess, that bureaucracy would succeed where guilt hadn't. I called Darius again. Is this a big deal? I asked. He sighed. It's annoying, not catastrophic. APS has to follow up on any report. They're not judging your character, they're just checking boxes. But be prepared. Someone might show up. Maybe call. Just stay calm. Right, I said. Because calm is my new thing. He chuckled. Good man. I hung up and stared at the letter again. The first thing I felt was fury. Not fear, fury. Because it meant they were still at it. Still trying to punish me for protecting myself. Still believing that the right to my time, energy, and sanity had no expiration date. But the second thing I felt was tired. Bone-deep tired. The kind that doesn't go away with sleep. Because fighting them, even when I won, still meant giving them space in my mind. Still meant checking for shadows on the wall every time I exhaled. I didn't want to fight anymore. I wanted to disappear. But instead I made tea. Sat by the window. And wrote out everything that had happened since the first time I offered to help my father post-stroke. Dates. Incidents. What I'd paid. What I gave up. What I tolerated. How it escalated. Then I added the court filing. The Protective Services complaint. The lawyer letters. The screenshot of the news alert. It became a timeline of erosion. And once I finished, I realized I wasn't just documenting trauma. I was building a shield. The next day, the investigator called. Her name was Gloria. Warm voice, clipped vowels. She introduced herself, explained she'd received a referral and needed to ask a few non-accusatory follow-ups. I almost laughed at that. She asked about my living situation, my contact with my father, what services he'd received from me in the last 6 months. When I told her he had sued me and lost, she paused. "Ah," she said. "I see. We don't get many cases like this, but we do get some." I offered to email my documentation. She accepted immediately. I sent it all: receipts, transcripts, letters, even my own written testimony. Within a day, she emailed back. "Thank you. Your file is thorough and deeply helpful. Unless new information surfaces, this case will be closed as unsubstantiated." It should have felt like another victory. Instead, I just stared at the screen. You know what it felt like? Paper. Like I'd finally beaten them at their own game, not with anger or righteousness, but with a stack of neatly labeled PDFs. It wasn't cathartic. But it was over. For now. You'd think that would be the end. But these stories rarely close clean. About a week after APS dropped the case, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in over a decade. "Hey Neil. I'm not sure if you remember me, I'm Claire. I used to work for your dad back in the Daymark Group days. I heard what happened through a mutual. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I blinked. Claire was his old assistant. Mid-2000s. Back when I was still in high school and Dad was at the top of his game, all tailored suits and weekend retreats, and smug little speeches about crushing the quarter. I messaged her back. "Thanks. Can I ask how you heard?" She wrote. "Someone forwarded me the local article. About the court case. I didn't even know you two were in contact again. I assumed after your brother, well. Anyway. I'm glad someone finally stood up to him." We kept talking. Turns out, she left the company in 2010 after a disagreement, her word, with Dad about overtime pay. He called her a liability. She called HR. The file vanished. So did her desk. "I wish I'd had your guts back then," she said. I told her I didn't feel brave. I felt broken. She said, "Sometimes they look the same." It's been 5 weeks since then. No more calls. No more letters. My mom hasn't reached out once. Which hurts, in that quiet, familiar way. The kind of hurt you don't even cry over anymore, because you've already rehearsed the grief 100 times. I'm seeing a therapist now. Name's Victor. Sharp suit, soft voice. He calls what I've been through complex relational trauma, which sounds fancy, but really just means you were loved on a leash. He's helping me cut the leash. One memory at a time. Like the Christmas I spent scraping ice off the driveway in -10 degrees because Dad refused to let his boy call a snow plow. Or the time I skipped prom to stay home and monitor Dad's blood pressure because Mom had a migraine. Little moments. Little bricks. All part of the same wall. Now I'm learning how to tear it down without crushing myself in the collapse. Some nights I still dream that he's banging on my door, not metaphorically, but literally. Fists on the wood, screaming that I've destroyed this family, and that I'm nothing without him. But then I wake up. And the only sound I hear is the radiator clicking. The lock is still in place. The quiet is still mine. The truth came, as it usually does in my life, in the most boring way possible. A letter in the mail I almost threw out. I'd started screening all correspondence from my parents by then, so when a thick, cream-colored envelope showed up from Harper and Lowell Estate Law, my first thought was that it was another stray legal document from the old case. I nearly shredded it on sight. But the return address was familiar. That was the firm my father had used for his will. I slit it open with a dull kitchen knife and read the first line. Notice of executor action. The estate of Martin and Elaine Welch has undergone revisions that may affect your status as beneficiary. My hands froze. Not because I cared about inheritance. I didn't. If anything, I would have paid money to never see their names in my mailbox again. But there was something chilling about the wording. Status as beneficiary. It wasn't past tense. It was present. I skimmed down the letter until I found the relevant line. Mr. Welch has transferred full control of the family trust and medical power of attorney to a newly appointed executor, effective immediately. The new executor? My cousin David. The same David who'd left me that voicemail after the hearing, the one about humiliating the family. I almost laughed. Of course. Of course that's what they do. If they couldn't control me through guilt, they'd do it through legacy. Through money. Through paperwork. I called the law firm, more out of curiosity than anything else. The receptionist was polite, cautious, clearly briefed to handle me like a bomb that might explode. I can't discuss client specifics, she said carefully. But I can confirm that Mr. Welch updated his estate plan 3 weeks ago. Does it mention me? I asked. She hesitated. You're listed, yes. But not as an heir. As a conditional trustee. Conditional? I repeated. Yes. The trust stipulates that certain assets can only be released to you if specific terms are met. My jaw tightened. What kind of terms? She lowered her voice slightly, as if embarrassed to even say it aloud. Full resumption of direct caregiving duties, as verified by family representatives. I laughed. Actually laughed. It startled her. So, I said slowly, he rewrote his will so I have to take care of him to get whatever crumbs he's leaving behind? I wouldn't phrase it that way, sir, but yes, that's essentially correct. Let me guess, I said. My cousin David decides if I've fulfilled my duties. I believe so. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table and just stared at the sunlight bleeding across the counter. I didn't feel anger. Not even surprise. Just this heavy, dull confirmation of what I'd known all along. To my father, love was a contract. And I was always behind on payments. I spent that night rereading the estate letter until the words blurred. I thought about all the years he'd accused me of being too emotional, when he was the one twisting his own legacy into a hostage note. I thought about how my mother must have signed off on it, because everything they did was joint, and she always nodded along, eyes wet but lips obedient. And I thought about the last time I'd seen him before the stroke. He'd cornered me in his garage, next to a shelf of old paint cans and rusting tools, lecturing me about taking responsibility for my own life. I'd been freelancing then, scraping by, and he'd called me a drifter. I remember him saying, "When I'm gone, don't expect a damn thing unless you've proven yourself useful." And now, years later, the man had found a way to turn even his death into a continuation of that threat. It almost impressed me. Almost. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't even tell Lauren. I just carried it around like a splinter under the skin, too small to justify surgery, too painful to ignore. But when the first email from David arrived, I knew I couldn't keep pretending it didn't bother me. From David Welch. Subject: Family Matters. Hey cousin. I know things have been tense, but your dad and mom have been through a lot. They asked me to reach out, since I'm handling some paperwork for them now. They'd really appreciate if you could stop avoiding calls and come by for a visit. No lawyers, no drama. Just talk. I promise I'll keep it civil. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back. David, if this is about guilt, save it. If it's about control, tell them to find a new target. I'm not coming back to that house. Ever. I hit send. 2 minutes later, the phone rang. It was Lauren. She'd seen the email. I'd forwarded it to her for a second opinion, forgetting she had notifications on. You're not actually going to go, right? She asked. No, I said. But I hesitated just long enough for her to catch it. Neil, she said quietly. You sound like someone who's trying to convince himself. She was right. Because as much as I wanted to be done, there was this twisted itch inside me, the part that still wanted closure. That wanted to stand in front of him and say, "You don't scare me anymore." That wanted him to see the man he couldn't break. But closure is a trap too. It's the last trick they use to pull you back in. A week passed. Then 2. Then, on a gray Thursday morning, I woke up to another email from David. This one wasn't polite. Neil, since you're refusing to engage directly, your father has decided to move forward with the property reassignment. The house on Maple Street, the one you grew up in, will be transferred to the trust under my management. Once he passes, you'll have no claim to it. Also, per his new directive, you're no longer listed as next of kin for medical decisions. He's replaced you with me. If you want to discuss this, you'll have to do it in person. He's still hoping you'll make things right. That line, make things right, hit harder than it should have. Because I finally understood what the lawsuit, the complaint, the estate, all of it had been about. It wasn't about money. It was about control. About dragging me back into the orbit he'd built his whole life around, a gravity made of guilt. And the cruelest part? He didn't need my presence anymore to win. He'd already rewritten the paperwork to make sure his hands stayed around my throat long after he was gone. But not if I got there first. That night, I started a new folder on my computer. /Documents Legacy. Inside it, I opened a blank file titled Statement of Refusal of Estate and Duties, Neil Welch. At the top I wrote, I, Neil Welch, of sound mind and independent judgment, formally refuse any and all claims, benefits, or obligations tied to the estate of Martin and Elaine Welch. I renounce all fiduciary responsibility and inheritance. I will not serve as caregiver, executor, trustee, or representative. I choose freedom over inheritance. Peace over performance. Distance over duty. Then I signed it. Dated it. Saved it as a PDF. It wasn't legally binding yet. Not officially. But symbolically? It was everything. For the first time in my life, I didn't just say no. I documented it. I made it real. And I meant it. The call came on a Sunday morning. Unknown number. Local area code. When I answered, a calm voice said, Mr. Welch? This is St. Anne's Hospital. We have your father here. For a second, I thought they were mistaken. Then the nurse said it. Massive stroke. He's in critical care. You're still listed as emergency contact. Even after everything, he hadn't removed me from that form. I drove there on autopilot. The whole way I rehearsed what I'd say, something mature, detached. But when I walked into that fluorescent room, all that came out was silence. He looked small. Not terrifying. Just human. Machines hissed and clicked. His chest rose shallowly beneath a paper gown. The man who'd weaponized power like oxygen was now tethered to plastic tubes. A nurse asked, Do you want to stay while we stabilize him? I nodded. For 2 hours, I sat in that chair listening to the monitor beep like a metronome for memories. Every insult, every slammed door, every time I'd bitten my tongue, they all played in rhythm. And then, somewhere between two beeps, I felt it break. Not hate. Not love. Just the thread that used to tie me to him. When the nurse came back, I said quietly, Remove me from his records. I'm not next of kin anymore. She hesitated, then nodded. I'll note it. I stood up, touched the metal railing of the bed, not his hand, and whispered, I hope you find peace, even if I had to find mine without you. Then I left. No grand speech. No forgiveness scene. Just the soft echo of my shoes down a hallway that finally led somewhere else. Outside, the air smelled like rain. I turned my phone off and started walking home. Halfway there, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. No one could reach me. No court. No contract. No ghost of a man who called control. Love. Just me. Free at last.